let's dive in. Why does abuse or violence cause trauma?
Yeah, thank you for talking about this really important topic with us today, Leila. Like I said, this is a topic I can talk about for a very long time. As a counselor at Daya, I've been there for about 6 years now.
Oh, wow, okay.
This is something that I see every day, and my role there is to oversee our client services program and to directly work with clients as their counselor.
Yeah.
So I want to define trauma a bit so we're all on the same page here about what it means, because it's a term that we commonly hear and we kind of know what it means. And it's used in the medical community as we hear about head trauma, but in the mental health world, trauma is an emotional or physical reaction to a harmful or life-threatening event or a series of events that causes lasting adverse effects on the person's mental and physical well-being. So, like I said, it can be a single event, for example, a car accident or Hurricane Harvey, for example, or it can be a series of events like domestic violence, which is typically not a one-time thing.
Right.
Abuse or domestic violence is typically something that's happening over a long period of time, over multiple different instances that happen sometimes daily, sometimes weekly. That can include physical abuse, emotional or verbal abuse, sexual abuse. So that's all a series of events that is traumatic.
Yes.
And for an event to be considered traumatic, there's kind of two ingredients, horror and helplessness. It has to make the person feel helpless to protect themselves or to take action, and they feel horror, a sense of intense fear, anxiety, or panic. So some examples, like I shared, it can be a car accident, it can be domestic violence, it could also be bullying or a serious health condition like cancer can be traumatic. The sudden or violent loss of a loved one can be traumatic. Abuse, childhood neglect, that is definitely traumatic as well. So there's lots of different types of life circumstances that can be traumatic. And as you hear that, you may think there's so many people out there that have experienced trauma. About 70% of adults in the U.S. have experienced some type of trauma over the course of their lifetime.
Oh, wow. That's a high number.
It's a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
It's most people.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people have experienced some type of trauma.
Right.
So it does impact their emotional state, their physical health, their relationships with others, and it impacts the brain. Like it really rewires how the brain works. So the brain, in the midst of a traumatic event, tends to switch into a different mode of operation, which is the 3 Fs, the fight, flight, or freeze.
Okay.
So in the fight mode, the person may attack or, fight back to really try to defend themselves. In the flight mode, they may try to flee, run away, escape. And in the freeze mode, they may just go numb. They may be completely physically unable to move or take action.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's pretty intense, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that tells you that the brain does those things because it's beyond its usual capacity to cope with.
Okay.
So something that is just beyond the brain's ability to manage, it will go into that kind of survival or defense mode where it's fight, flight, or freeze.
Freeze. Okay, I've heard of fight, flight. I didn't hear of freeze. So
Especially for victims of sexual abuse, freeze is usually what happens. Since they may not feel safe to fight back, and they may not be physically able to flee, freeze is the only option. So what that can look like to the outside person is, well, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you run away? Why didn't you scream? Because they were in that frozen state.
Yeah,
and
they just go numb, I guess.
Exactly.
Right?
They just sometimes go into a out-of-body experience where they may feel that they are not physically present. The brain can kind of escape mentally instead of being able to escape physically. So they may feel like they're watching the incident from like an outside perspective.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You hear about out-of-body experiences sometimes, and it's usually a trauma response.
Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I have goosebumps just thinking about it, right? Yeah, for them to go through that. So then how are abuse and trauma related to physical and mental health?
The mind and the body are really the same thing, and this is what I educate clients about all the time. Your mind is your body and your body is your mind. So anything that happens to you physically also happens to you mentally and the other way around. So your mental and your physical health is deeply impacted because of the way the brain rewires itself. Trauma affects your memory really deeply. A normal memory that's not traumatic is usually in the form of like a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's like a sequential memory.
Okay.
You know, if I were going to remember how I drove to work this morning, it would be I got my car keys, I opened the door, I put on my shoes, I got into the car, and I, drove to work. I checked the weather forecast. But a traumatic memory would not be like that. It would be fragmented.
Okay.
It may be missing big chunks of memory where the person was just completely blanked out, and the brain repressed that memory because it was too painful. And whatever memory is there, it may be in the form of like flashbulb memories is what they're called.
It just keeps comes sporadically.
Yeah, it's like sporadic little bits and pieces of information that are remembered. It may be like they remember a sensation like pain or fear, or they remember like a color or a smell or a single image instead of like a video.
Yeah.
So memories that were of traumatic events can be unreliable for that reason. Like if you're telling the police what happened, you may not be able to really remember what happened.
Okay.
And that can cause a lot of difficulty for trauma survivors to make reports of what happened to them, or to even tell people in their lives what happened because they may not fully remember. And that can be a barrier to getting support.
Right.
Because people may not believe them.
Yeah.
They may say, it doesn't sound like that.
Yeah, the story doesn't add up.
It doesn't add up. Yeah, you don't really
Yeah.
have a lot of detail, or you're not really making sense.
Right.
But that's because of how the brain codes traumatic memories. They're not coded in language or in a sequence, beginning, middle, and end, like normal memories.
Yeah.
They're coded just sometimes in the form of sensations or images that can be very difficult to convey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I want to also touch on what other types of mental health or physical health conditions can arise from having experienced trauma. We hear about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD,
Right.
often in connection with soldiers returning from war, that they have PTSD. And PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a condition in which the person re-experiences trauma. They may have flashbacks where they feel as if it's happening all over again.
Yeah.
They usually exist in a state of constant anxiety and hypervigilance where they're really on alert, where they're looking over their shoulder. They're always watchful.
Yeah.
They feel as if something bad is about to happen all the time because of how their brain is now on a state of alert all the time as kind of a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
Right? So PTSD does not happen to every single trauma survivor, though. Like I said, about 70% of people have some history of trauma. About 6% of people have PTSD.
Oh.
So not everybody will develop it, but it is one of the conditions that can result. In addition to that, panic disorders, depression, anxiety, addictions, eating disorders, all kinds of other conditions can also result from.
Yeah, because they say that even trauma can lead to physical disease, right? Because now your body, or I don't know how far this is true, but when you have a traumatic event, to get out of that flight, fight, freeze mode, it takes time. So if you have not gotten over the trauma, then there is cause for disease, because now your body is not breathing correctly, it's not doing its functions correctly, so it's causing a lot of other issues in the system, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the physical aspect of it. Many times our clients complain of things like unexplained headaches, migraines, stomach pains, vision changes, muscle tightness or tension, even chronic conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, gastrointestinal issues. Some of those things tend not to have much of a medical cause that can be pinpointed, and it's a result of, like you said, breathing difficulties, chronic stress,
Yeah.
your body releases a hormone called cortisol when it's under stress.
Right.
It's not supposed to be a hormone that's released all the time.
Right.
That's harmful. It's only there in like short bursts to get you moving.
Yeah.
But if you're releasing it all the time, you have a chronically high level of cortisol that's then related to other health problems.
Right.
So sometimes if you have unexplained health problems, there could be a psychological reason behind it because, like I said, mind is body, body is mind. We're all,
Yeah.
it's all the same system.
Yeah, yeah, and some like that's true, but you don't think you think your mind is separate and then your physical body is separate.
Exactly.
But,
We
yeah.
tend to think about it like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But, you know, in certain cultures too, there's a much deeper understanding of mind-body connection.
Yeah.
And that's something that can be learned in therapy, such as like what I do in my work with clients at Daya too, is to teach a better connection to your body.
Okay.
Trauma survivors tend to be disconnected from their bodies because they don't feel safe in their bodies.
Oh.
If they have experienced a dangerous event and they feel it's still in their body, the traumatic memory is stored in their bodies,
Yeah.
you know, so they kind of want to suppress it and not be
See,
too...
again, I would think your traumatic memory is stored in your brain. So what do you mean by it's stored in your body?
It's stored in your body in the sense that your brain is not fully able to remember or verbalize in words
Right.
what happened,
Right.
but that you may feel a trigger physically.
Yeah,
know,
like you
if-
said, a pain, like some sort of pain.
Exactly. You feel those aches and pains
Yeah.
that don't really have any other cause, or that you may suddenly feel a certain, you know, your heart starts pounding and your mouth goes dry, you start sweating if you're around a certain person.
Yeah, like palpitation.
Yeah, or if you're, you know, feeling triggered, something has happened that's reminding you of the traumatic event, you tend to feel a lot of like physical anxiety signs,
Right.
like
Yeah.
sweating, dry,
Yeah.
dry mouth,
Yeah,
sweaty
sweaty hands.
palms.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
skin goes really pale.
Yeah.
Your heart starts pounding. You start
Right.
shaking. So those types of physical signs indicate that your body remembers when your mind doesn't.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's deep.
Yeah.
That is deep.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So mind-body connection can help kind of heal some of that damage. And, you know, I want to just make sure people understand that there is hope.
Yeah.
Not everybody who has experienced trauma is doomed.
Yeah, yeah, true.
Most people do not develop post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
There are ways to heal and manage feelings that have come up from trauma.
Okay. How can someone know if their mental health is affected by past abuse or trauma?
Yeah, so it's kind of listening to those signals that we mentioned. Like if you have unexplained physical health issues, if you are recognizing that something that happened to you in the past was a trauma and you're not really sure, I would advise to speak to a professional, to talk to a therapist who has experience in treating trauma, to really dive deep into it in a safe and trusting and confidential environment.
Right.
That's not a journey that anybody should really embark on alone.
Yeah.
The healing process takes a long time and it requires support. It's not something that you can really try to figure out on your own and manage on your own, and nobody deserves to do that
Yeah.
alone.
Yes. Yeah.
It takes
You
support.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the long-term effects of trauma?
Long term, it really affects every single aspect of your life. You know, if you're at work and your boss talks to you in a tone of voice that is the same way your abuser used to talk to you, you may get triggered.
Okay.
And then you may, you know, go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode at work. So that's an example of how a trauma history can show up in your workplace. In your other relationships, like with your children, if you were abused as a child, you may not really know how to relate to your children when they're like screaming and shouting, and you may just go get triggered then when that's happening.
Yeah.
So it can affect how you parent your children.
Oh, wow.
And in your romantic relationships. You know, if you have a history of sexual trauma, you may have a hard time getting intimate with your partner.
Right.
You may have a hard time kind of trusting people or, you know, enforcing boundaries with them or really even knowing what your boundaries are. So, like, long-term impacts of trauma can look like those types of patterns repeating in your relationships. It can show up in how your health works out for you over the course of your lifespan. And it can cause lots of different mental conditions, like eating disorders, turning to drugs or alcohol to cope. Addictions are really common in people with trauma histories. Maybe not so much in the South Asian community because there's an added layer of stigma against drugs and alcohol too, especially for women. So we don't see that so much, but other types of unhealthy coping mechanisms can show up in people with trauma histories because they turn to something to cope. So coping mechanisms that are unhealthy can look like denial, denying that it ever happened, refusing to
which
acknowledge.
I think is such a big part of our South Asian community. Let's just shove it under the rug and it's gone.
Exactly.
I think that's a trait that we have that I'm glad that, Daya is there, so we can talk through it and y'all are supporting these women.
Right.
Through the
denial is huge in our society. It's kind of a cultural trait that we sometimes pride ourselves on. We say we don't talk about such things.
Yes.
Right? We treat it as like it's shameful or it's taboo or something.
Stigma.
But many of us have a history of some kind of trauma ourselves.
Right.
So we've learned these traits from our parents. Like these are things that are hush-hush, we don't talk about. We sometimes pass along these traits to our children, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Our child says something to us, we're like, don't say that. That's a bad topic. We don't talk about that.
Right.
It's hush hush. So when we hush our children, they learn the same type of denial. And if you're not denying, you're usually minimizing. So when we do talk about things, we do tend to minimize their seriousness or their impact. So minimizing can look like saying it was so long ago, why don't you just get over it? Or it wasn't such a big deal. No, it could have been worse. Like those types of well-meaning comments are minimizing because they don't really see or hear the person for where they are, and they're more just a result of you being uncomfortable talking about it. So you tend to just minimize it or brush it off as it's not a big deal. It was such a long time ago. Like you should just get over it. Because that's like giving a shut up call to the person, right? It's telling them I don't want to hear about this anymore, and you should just not talk about this. So that makes it harder for survivors to get support from loved ones in their lives.
But so what should the person be saying? Because the person on the other end probably doesn't mean that, and then maybe because the person hasn't been through such a traumatic event, they don't know how to be supportive to their friend, or they've heard the story so many times that they're like, okay, why isn't this person over it?
Right? Exactly. And it comes from good intentions. It comes from just a lack of understanding of what trauma is and how it impacts the person. Like the brain doesn't really know time. It doesn't know that something happened so long ago. When it's reminded of it, it feels like it's happening all over again. So because of that, like time does not necessarily heal all wounds when it comes to trauma.
Yes, time is the biggest healer. But
not always.
No, because there are times I guess you just suppress it and you kind of shove it away, and then something triggers it.
Then something happens, and you're reminded all over again. This is not something that you can run away from or hide from. So to answer your question about what should the person say, the person should just listen. Okay. That sometimes listening is more powerful than saying anything. Just being there and asking them about it, like tell me about what happened. It sounds like that was really hard. Asking them how did that impact you? And just giving your support, just saying I'm here for you. You can talk about this with me anytime. If you ever feel like you're having a bad day or you're reminded of it, call me. I can help you through it. And then suggesting that they get some help. Because it's not the friend's responsibility to heal a trauma. Right. Other people don't know your triggers. They're so individual to the person. If I'm triggered by the color red, for example, you don't know that. It's not your responsibility to protect me from it. It's my responsibility to know what my triggers are and to know how they impact me. And then to do my own work of figuring out a plan, whether that's by myself or with a friend or a therapist, to figure out how I'm going to manage those triggers.
Okay. That's good to know. So what should I do if I've been abused or traumatized?
The biggest thing that you should know is that you're not alone, and that you're not damaged, you're not broken, to know that what happened was not your fault,
Right.
and it doesn't define you. It
Okay.
doesn't make you who you are. It was something that happened to you. It's not who you are. That's a big one, because I see a lot of people internalize their trauma and develop beliefs about themselves as a result of it. You know, they say that my parents never loved me, so I am unlovable. And they go through the world for the rest of their lives feeling that they are unlovable.
Yeah.
Or that, you know, if my husband beats me, it must be because I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
I'm a bad wife.
Yeah.
I'm a bad
It's
mother.
my fault. Yeah.
Yeah. So developing those types of beliefs, you know, is what causes a lot of problems later on in life for trauma survivors.
Yeah.
So if you have been abused or traumatized, you know, just know that those beliefs can change. You can learn new ones. You can learn more accurate ones. You can learn healthier ways to manage.
Yeah.
You can get support, you know, and that there's help out there. Daya is one of the organizations that provides free and confidential help to South Asian survivors of abuse, whether that's family violence or intimate partner violence or stalking. And there's other organizations too,
Yeah.
wonderful ones that are doing similar work to us. There's community mental health clinics that provide low-cost therapy.
Okay.
If you have insurance or you're able to pay, there's lots of wonderful private practice therapists that have advanced training in treating trauma that are wonderful to work with and that can really help you.
Yeah.
So I would advise people to seek help, not try to do this alone. It's great if you have a supportive network of friends and family, but not everybody has that.
Yeah.
And that's where the professionals come in, to where we can be that listening ear, and we have an understanding of, you know,
And guide in the right direction, right?
Right.
Like, so that you can find out who you really are and
yeah,
get over the trauma, or at
Yeah.
least have tools how to deal with
how
it.
to deal with it exactly. So
Yeah.
the professionals can teach you those tools.
Right.
They can give you that information and really work with you intensely over a period of time to figure
Yeah.
out like what your triggers are, how you can manage them,
Yeah.
and you know how the trauma has impacted you and how you can.
Yeah, and
move
like you
forward
said,
from
it cannot be an instant thing, because I think we are in a world that, you know, you order
Quick
on
fix.
Amazon and yeah, it should be there within like 4 hours now, right?
I wish it was like that. I wish there was a pill or
Yeah.
some kind of magic wand. But no, it's a long-term process,
Yes.
unfortunately. It's a healing process. It's not a quick fix. I will say that single event traumas can be resolved sometimes a bit more easily than
Yeah.
complex traumas.
Yeah.
And by that I mean, for example, a car accident or a hurricane can be
Yeah.
easier to resolve than childhood sexual abuse or domestic violence.
Right.
Because longer term traumas, you know, they have deeper roots in the brain and the body
Okay.
that have caused more of these types of beliefs about yourself. A victim of a car crash may not say, I am unworthy.
Yeah.
A victim of child abuse may feel, yes,
Yeah.
I am unworthy.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the difference
Yeah.
there. And as far as like seeking help, I want to spotlight a website called herefortexas.com.
Okay.
HERE. That's where you can go to kind of figure out who's the right therapist for you. It's a mental health navigation line.
Oh wow, that's really nice to know.
Yeah, depending on your location or your ability to pay, you know, or your type of treatment required, you
Okay.
can give them that information and they give you a list of resources.
HereTexas.org.
Herefortexas.com.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know, because then how do you know what kind of therapist you need, or you know, so that's good.
Yeah, many people just feel like, where do I turn? Who do
Yeah,
I
where do I
ask?
start from, right?
Yeah.
And then I guess it's always a stigma. So even like talking about it and trying to get help, you might be a little bit hesitant to ask someone, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
if you need a hairdresser, you can ask your friend
yes,
for recommendations.
or a dentist for that
Yeah,
matter,
but if you
right?
need a therapist, people
Yeah.
feel shy. So
Yeah,
go,
yeah.
turn to the internet, go to herefortexas.com. or call Daya if you're a survivor. We will get you to the right place.
Okay, awesome. We're going to take a quick break. We're having this amazing and very insightful conversation with Hareema Mela, Director of Client Services at Daya. So, can the effects of trauma be avoided or addressed?
That's a great question, and it's kind of a two-part answer. The first is avoidance doesn't work, unfortunately.
Yeah.
In fact, it's more likely to cause worse effects from trauma the more you try to avoid it. Because the research shows PTSD is more likely to occur in people who engage in avoidance behaviors. And by that I mean refusing to think about the trauma, not telling anybody about it, avoiding things that remind you of it, or like going out of your way to avoid people, places, or things that remind you of the trauma. The more you suppress it or try to suppress it, the more likely it is to affect you.
Okay.
But on the other hand, I would say there are definitely protective factors in your life that can help you not be as badly affected by the trauma, and that would be continuous contact with loved ones in your life, support from your loved ones, disclosing the trauma to loved ones, using positive coping mechanisms, and that can even be things like a sense of humor, using laughter, still maintaining a connection to the positives in your life, and finding some kind of meaning in your life, especially finding meaning from the trauma. And that's not easy.
I can't even imagine that.
It takes time to be able to find some kind of meaning, and that can be like, you see how the trauma has changed you as a person, things that it has taught you, people that it has brought you in contact with, that can give you a sense of, not that there was some bright side to it, there wasn't, it was still a horrible experience, but that you're in a better place now, and that you have learned to cope with it. That can be an example of how you can find meaning from it. Another way is to help others in their healing journey. To be a source of support for others can be very healing for yourself as well. And the biggest thing I would say is to believe that you can manage your feelings.
Right.
People that have a sense of helplessness, that I can't do it, I'm not good enough, I'll never be strong enough to overcome this, they have a harder time healing than people who believe that they can. So having that belief in your own skills and abilities to learn and to grow from it, that is a way that the impacts of trauma can at least be managed.
Okay.
Not avoided. Avoidance doesn't work.
Yes, absolutely. So what is the impact of trauma on relationships?
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit before, but in relationships, you see it replay in terms of patterns of communication and behavior that are kind of tied to that fight, flight, or freeze.
Yes.
So if you are going into a fight mode as a result of something that happened in a relationship, let's say you get into a fight with your partner, you may start yelling at them, cursing at them, blaming, criticizing, raging, breaking things. That's you getting triggered by that argument and going into a fight mode as a result of how your brain has now rewired itself.
Okay.
Being really demanding or controlling. Some of these behaviors that we see from abusers can be a result of their past trauma. So the fight mode type behaviors are very indicative of that.
Okay.
Because many people who've had trauma from their past, then they may abuse others.
Okay.
They may have a hard time kind of managing their own frustration or anger, and they may take it out on others in that kind of fight mode. On the other hand, if you're going into a flight mode, you run from your problems. You avoid them, you panic, you run away from intimacy, you just flee. You just, remove yourself from any kind of conflict or intense emotion. Or if you're going into freeze mode, you tend to feel helpless. You're unable to say no. You go numb. You may be a people pleaser. So those types of patterns can show up in relationships that have their roots in the trauma that happened to that person.
Okay. That's good to know. What does experiencing childhood trauma mean for adults?
Childhood trauma is a really complex one. It leads to those really core changes in the brain that impact how you think about the world and your place in it. So if you think about a little child, a little baby, they're dependent on their caregivers around them to shape what they believe is true.
Yes.
So they learn beliefs about the world from how they are treated as children.
Right.
If you are neglected or abused as a child, you learn that the world is a scary place. You learn that people cannot be trusted.
Yeah.
Or that you are not worthy of love or care.
Right.
So then you may think about yourself very differently as a result. A child that's raised in a healthy, nurturing, safe, and loving home is confident. You know, they can trust other people, they can speak up, they can focus and pay attention. But a child who was traumatized early in life, they don't develop with confidence and, you know, ability to learn. They may just be barely surviving.
Okay.
That's a child that is not going to thrive or not going to develop normally.
Okay.
Even in pregnancy, I can say stress hormones in the mother's bloodstream go into the unborn child's bloodstream.
Oh, wow.
So the more stressed a mother is, or if a pregnant woman is experiencing trauma, the child will feel it too. So that's a way in which, you know, childhood trauma can start even before you're born.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really
That's
heartbreaking. You know,
shocking,
childhood
right? Yeah.
trauma is just very, very complex and difficult to treat.
So that's already wired in your brain. You're not even still born.
So by the time you're born, if you're born into a home that's abusive, you're going to learn communication patterns that are abusive. You're going to learn coping skills that are unhealthy, and you're going to learn that people can't be trusted, or that even your closest loved ones cannot be trusted. So then you grow up into an adult that's unable to have healthy relationships as a result of that. That's
so
where we see a
sad.
lot of, you know, if you wonder why do people hurt others, why do they abuse others?
Yes.
Sometimes it's because they've been hurt themselves, and that's not an excuse for treating others badly, but it is an explanation, a possible explanation.
Yeah. But it's so sad. Like it's a circle. Like then how do you get out of that? Like if there is an abuser, for example, you know, he's been abused and now he's abusing. But so where does this cycle end? Right? Like till he ends up in jail. I mean, that's still not the end.
Exactly.
You know?
Then it's still impacting his partner, his children.
Yes,
So
exactly. So it's, I mean, now it's gone to his family and to his children.
3 generations
exactly.
are now impacted. So there's definitely this cycle of violence, this intergenerational cycle of abuse that keeps going on and on until there's something that intervenes and breaks that cycle. Well, that's what we at Daya, like our mission is ultimately to end
this
cycle of violence, to end gender-based violence in the South Asian community.
Wow.
So to break the cycle, it takes self-responsibility, to being responsible for your own actions. You know, it takes accountability. The community has to hold people accountable for abusing others. And it takes like self-healing, you know, for the person who was the victim to go on to their own, you know, healing journey, to be able to break that cycle for themselves so that they don't teach those things to their children.
Yes. So is this what generational trauma is, what we've spoken about?
Pretty much, yeah. So generational trauma, and I'm glad you bring this up because it's not a topic that's very talked about, even in the mental health community. But it's what we see all the time, especially in our South Asian community, is these unhealthy coping mechanisms of denial and minimization, like we talked about.
Or avoidance.
Yeah, exactly. That keeps people from being able to even acknowledge that they've had this trauma. And then there's this cycle that continues.
Yes.
So generational trauma is basically trauma that's passed on from parent to child to, you know, grandparent to grandchild, all those types of behavioral patterns, unhealthy coping skills, or even on a genetic level, information that's passed down chemically and, you know, from the brain chemistry down to the stress hormones in your body that are kind of passed down from generation to generation. And there's also broader social impacts to this. So systematic oppression, racism, caste oppression,
Yeah.
war, things that
Yeah.
South Asian people have been through
Yeah.
and are still going through, those are also being passed down from generations.
Oh.
Poverty, those are
Yeah.
types of things that, like, if your parents struggled with it,
Yeah.
it impacts you too.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you think about partition, that was
Yeah.
such a huge trauma for our
Right.
people,
Right.
But
Yes.
it's not really seen as that.
No.
We don't hear our grandparents, our parents talking about it as, how stressful or traumatic it was for them. It's
Yes.
seen as like, it was a long time ago, we're not going to talk about it.
Yeah. Yes. We only see it in movies and, that's it, right?
And we tell ourselves stories about the positives or the heroism that happened from it, or the patriotism or the nationalism, and we only focus on those aspects, but not on the human impact of partition or things like racism and poverty and oppression that our
Right.
people still go through.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know it could be genetics. You say it, like my son has this anger issues, and we're like, oh, where did he get from? I'm like, I'm sure it's from his grandparents. But now I have scientific proof for that.
Yeah.
It does pass on from genetics. But then
Yeah.
I guess you're responsible for breaking that cycle.
Yeah, and you can break it. Genetics
Right.
does not mean a death sentence.
Exactly.
It's not a life sentence.
Yes, yeah.
So there's a chemical called neuropeptide Y, and there's regions in the brain that control how you respond to stressful situations.
Okay.
The more of that chemical that you have, the more you're able to cope. The less of it you have,
Oh.
the more negatively you respond to a stressful situation.
Okay.
So there's genetics that determine how your brain makes sense of emotional situations and how it responds to them.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you can notice those things about yourself, you
Yeah.
can't change your genes, but you
Yeah.
can change your behaviors.
Behaviors, yes, exactly. Why do traumatic experiences impact some people more than others?
Yeah, great question. So kind of continuing along in that, like, genetic makeup
Yeah.
of the person, that's a big part of how they're going to deal with stressful or emotional situations. If you have the right genetic makeup, you're in luck. If you don't, you may have a harder time. So some of it is biological and it's outside of your control.
Okay.
But the parts that are in your control are about your life circumstances.
Okay.
And some of that is out of your control and some is not. So if you have a lot of loving, healthy support, supportive relationships, you're in a better position to be able to manage your trauma. But if you've had childhood trauma as well, and then on top of that, you have domestic violence, for example. So if you have
Yeah.
this kind of chain of events of repeated exposure to trauma, it's going to impact you more. You're more likely to develop PTSD. If your help-seeking experiences have been negative, like anytime you've tried to tell somebody or get help, you've been dismissed or you didn't get what you need, you're more likely to have a harder time moving on. If you are struggling financially and you're just trying to put a roof over your head and feed your children, then healing from trauma is not going to be a priority, right?
No,
Of
no.
course.
Yeah.
So then you may be more likely to just dismiss it or forget about it and, try to suppress it because you just don't have the time, energy, or the resources or the money to address it. So trauma does disproportionately affect people who are financially disadvantaged, who are socially disadvantaged, who don't have a lot of people of support around them. And that's many times our Daya clients.
Yeah.
They're here in a new country. They don't have a lot of support. They may not have a lot of access to money because of financial abuse or other reasons. So, that's where we do come in to try to be that support for them if they lack it in their lives.
Okay. How does Daya help survivors process and heal from trauma?
So Daya provides what we call trauma-informed care.
Okay.
And what that means is that all of our staff are trained in trauma and how it impacts people, and we build it into our programs and our organization at every step of the way.
Okay.
So when a person first calls us, the person they speak to knows about trauma, is very well trained in responding to it, and is very compassionate and empathetic about it.
Okay.
So here I will talk about the 4 R's of trauma-informed care. The first is realization, realizing how trauma affects people. And the second is recognizing the signs of trauma. So when we work with a client at Daya, we recognize we're on the lookout for signs of trauma, of those flashbulb memories, of emotional difficulties, relationship difficulties, sexual difficulties. We're looking for those signs of how that trauma has impacted them so that we can talk to them about it and work on it.
Okay.
And the third R is having a system which can responding to trauma in an appropriate way, which is to believe the person, not question them on all the details, not ask for any proof, not force them to talk about it if they don't want to, give them lots of control and choices in the process. So we are not the leader at Daya. With the client is in a partnership with us. We're equals. We are not trying to make choices for them or tell them what to do, and that's trauma informed, because we let them take control when control has been taken away from them.
Yes.
The last thing we want is to be the abuser.
Right.
for
Absolutely.
them.
Yes.
So the last R is resisting re-traumatization. And that comes into avoiding any situation that's going to re-traumatize the person. For example, like making a police report can be very re-traumatizing.
Oh.
Going to court, those things can put a client through having to repeat their story, sometimes in front of strangers. So we never push them into anything that will be re-traumatizing. Okay. Even telling us. Like if a client tells their story to us once, we don't ask it again.
Okay, that's good.
So if they tell one staff member, the others have access to it, and we don't put a person through like endless paperwork and all of those types of barriers that are going to make it harder.
Okay, that's good to know. Talk therapy isn't always a good fit for everyone. What are alternatives to traditional therapy for survivors?
Yeah, I love that question because I am trained in one of those approaches, which is EMDR. Okay. It stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing.
Okay.
It's a mouthful, but what it basically is, it's a type of therapy that uses bilateral eye movements.
Okay.
Left to right, and other types of bilateral stimulation, such as audio or tactile, to kind of recode that memory in the brain in a different way that makes it less distressing.
Oh.
So this is a type of treatment that is kind of the gold standard trauma treatment that is very, very effective and a bit faster. It can lead to results in about 6 to 8 sessions as opposed to months and months and years.
Yeah.
EMDR is one thing that we offer at Daya. Other forms can be somatic therapy or more body-based, like I referenced the mind-body connection. There's different ways to help somebody reconnect with their body to where they feel safe in their body again. Deep breathing and meditation techniques, mindfulness, yoga and exercise are very healing as well. There's other types of, those are the types of therapy that we do offer at that.
Yeah.
What we don't is animal-assisted therapy can be very helpful.
Okay.
A bond that you have with an animal, a pet, or there's equine therapists out there that use horses.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so you can have a bond with an animal that's very trusting and non-judgmental, and that can be healing.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, so people have emotional support animals.
Yes.
Like therapy dogs, for example. I wish we could have a therapy dog at that. I don't think our building owners would allow that.
Oh.
Yeah, so there's animal-assisted therapy as well as art therapy or music therapy that uses various art forms or music forms to create new meaning and new associations, more positive connections in the brain, and to be able to make sense of something in a different way, to where it's not just talking and talking and talking about the same thing, but it's building a bit more positivity around it.
Okay. Yeah, so there are quite a different kind of therapies, right?
Exactly.
So it's not just talk all the time.
Yeah, we may think about therapy as this: you sit in an office, you sit on a couch
And
for
you're
an
just
hour.
listening. Or that's
Yeah.
what they at least show in, your social media or movies and things like that.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be like that. Your therapist
No.
is there as your partner, and
Right.
it's your right as your client to tell them what you want, what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
If you're sitting in your therapist's office and you're just getting sick of it, tell them,
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about this anymore. Can we do something else for the rest of the session?
Right.
Can we do some drawing? Can
Yeah.
we, especially with children, there's
Yeah.
play therapy.
I have heard
Yeah,
of
and
that.
just different forms of not having to use words all the
Yeah.
time. Because trauma, those memories are not in words anyway.
Yes.
Sometimes you need something else to kind of break you out of that mindset.
Yes, yeah. That's interesting, very insightful. So what is secondhand trauma? We were talking about it, and how can you recognize it?
Yeah, secondhand trauma is trauma that you can experience as a result of witnessing or hearing somebody else talk about it. So, for example, we were talking about how, like, being a therapist can lead to a lot of secondhand trauma
Yes.
from hearing about other people's traumatic experiences.
Yes.
Being a friend to a trauma survivor can also lead to that same experience.
Yeah.
If you, as the friend, are always having to hear about it, and you may feel helpless to help the person.
Yes.
It may be disturbing, just the details and things that you're hearing
Yeah.
about. So people in professions such as EMTs, people who work in emergency medical care, or people who work in the police and fire department, they're especially vulnerable to secondhand trauma, burnout, or re-victimization. There's a few different words that are
Yeah.
used for this that all mean the same thing, is that being witness to such a vast array of human pain and suffering
Yes.
is hard, and it impacts you
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we are social creatures. We have empathy,
Yes.
hopefully, and that
Yes. Yes.
we feel the pain of others, and
Right.
that can wear us down after a while.
Yeah.
So it's important to take note of how it is impacting you,
Yeah.
and looking out for responses in yourself, such as detachment. Like, if you want to just shut off, if you want to just detach yourself from that situation, that's a sign that it's getting to be too much for you.
Yeah.
If you're having a hard time being present and empathic for that person,
Yeah.
that's a sign. If you're getting angry or judgmental or dismissive, that can be a sign too that it's getting to be too much for you.
Yeah.
And just knowing those signs in yourself,
Yes.
and then doing what you need to do, whether that's taking a break, encouraging that person to seek other sources of support, taking time off from your job if that's coming from your job.
Right.
So it is your responsibility as the individual, and if it's coming from work, it's also the responsibility of your employer to provide opportunities for self-care, for debriefing, and for taking time off.
Okay. So what message do you have for us survivors experiencing trauma?
I would want to say to survivors that they're not alone, that we hear them, we support them, we understand them. I would say that you're not broken, you're not damaged, and that even if you're not born with the skills to heal from trauma, that you can learn them,
Yes.
and it's worth it.
Right.
That would be my number one message, is that it's worth doing the work
Yeah.
to build the life that you want to live.
Okay.
You can learn skills to manage your feelings. It can take time,
Yeah.
but it can be worth it to get a meaningful, a peaceful, and a fulfilling life.
Okay.
So I would tell them to also pay attention to their lifestyle, who they surround themselves with. Those are the things that are in your control. What happened to you was not in your control, and it wasn't your fault. But what you do now is 100% in your control. You are in the driver's seat,
Right.
and that you can surround yourself with positive people, eat healthy, sleep healthy, exercise,
Yeah.
use healthy coping mechanisms, avoid using unhealthy ones,
Yeah.
and to reach out for support.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hareema. It's been like an hour. It just flew by.
It
And
flew by.
Yes.
I told you I could talk about this all day. I can stay.
We would love to have you again for sure, because It was a heavy topic, but the way you explained it, and it is so insightful and eye-opening. There are some terms that I've like never heard of, and you know, sometimes you hear things and it's more in movies, so you're like, oh, that doesn't happen in real life, but it does, you know. So like generational trauma and things like that, right? So I really appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we'll see you soon. We want you
course.
back for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure talking to you.
Yes. Thank you, listeners, so much for being on our show. We'll see you same time, same place next Monday.